Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to The View Up Here. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is April 4th, 2018. The third winter. Tonight, very happy to bring back Stanley Cohen. And it didn't take the two of us long to agree on a suitable title for what we're going to talk about tonight. WTF USA. Well, you know, there had kind of been a standard established that as the world's only superpower, a certain degree of predictability and consistency in international policy would, kind of manufacture consent for the various indulgences carried out by the United States around the world. Not that it really helped. I listed some on the show page. Asked those people how much democracy has come to them. But the 6-time bankrupt master businessman in charge has decided that he wants a very dog-eat-dog environment. And of course, keeping his fleeting attention is more important than competency. Enter the Rex Tillerson issue. So everybody who thought that what it took to get into Trump's cabinet was to be corporate successful, corporate connected, very wealthy. But we find out that's not really the case, because if you're not loyal to the boss, there's the door. Mike Pompeo has been named to replace Tillerson at State, going from top spy to top diplomat. Good gig. Lots to say about him. Moving in to head the CIA, the nominee is Gina Haspel. Somebody else who doesn't need much introduction. We'll get to that. And General H.R. McMaster has been shown the door as National Security Advisor because he dared to contradict the boss. None other than John Bolton. A blast from the past, never met a war he didn't like. And this job doesn't need a confirmation. Custom made for Mr. Bolton. Now, Stanley Cohen has litigated against many of these policies that have come through the last decade or two. And a lot of the people that are making their way back into the White House had something to do with that process. As I said, it's always a pleasure to have Stanley on the show. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the show.
I thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I hope things up in the stable North Country, far northwest country of the North American continent, are warm and well and doing better than down here. That's for damn sure. Although, listen, look at the bright side. I still remain convinced that Ivanka and Trudeau are going to be an issue at some point down the road. That fawning get together at the White House where she stared at him and visions of Kushner and the White House went all down. Boy, did they go away. I've seen some fawning in my day, and he I swear that was a little wink, but that's neither here nor there. That's a terrible thing to say, I guess. I'm liable to get sued by the other Cohen for whatever I can't figure out.
Well, I would venture a comment that Justin and Sophie are a somewhat more stable and back and forth relationship than Donald and Melania. I'm just guessing there, but I'm willing to bet on
Melania
that.
replaced Ivanka?
Well,
who knows?
That's true. I did get the reference wrong. I should have been saying Jared and Ivanka and Ivanka.
It's just, listen, look at the bright side. Fortunately, the idiot in chief really doesn't know north from south. So Canada is going to be protected. The Canadian border is going to be protected by, 100,000 U.S. National Guardsmen to make sure that none of us who have had it and are otherwise prohibited or banned from moving north will get across the border. I'm glad to say. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, this is something that not enough people don't think about. I mean, if you put fences up to keep everybody out, who says you can still get out?
That's true. Well, it's funny. There's two issues I was thinking about last night. I was speaking to a friend of mine from the Middle East, and in the midst of a war zone, and it's kind of sad when you find stability by talking to a buddy in the war zone. But the one thing that I'm sort of missing about the fence, should it ever go up anywhere, is there is this huge, wonderful body of water that, hugs the bottom of the United States, which I'm not quite sure where the fence is going around there. That's number one. And number two is I'm sitting here working last night on a piece, and I'm listening in the backdrop to, whatever news station it was, and I heard that, the idiot in chief had announced his plan to dispatch U.S. personnel, military personnel, as, sort of substitute interim border patrol guys. And, look, I guess I might have provided some insight because I quickly just switched from writing to Twitter and said, well, there's this law that was passed about 150 years ago that says you can't use the military to do that. Posse Comitatus prohibits the use of American military personnel domestically except for very narrowly defined circumstances and when they're not allowed to carry their guns. And lo and behold, I went to bed, and this morning the White House clarified that he meant the National Guard. Well, that's still a problem because he has to nationalize the National Guard. And basically what he doesn't understand, and which I find so interesting about, all the populists, the guys that I call Al-Qaeda in the United States, is the National Guard is a state creation. It's not a federal creation. And it, in fact, consistent with this whole Second Amendment debate, is the Second Amendment was designed to safeguard the government from 50% of the people on the streets or in the roads in those days, not the other way around. And there was this rebellion called Shays' Rebellion that I believe took place while George Washington was president, I think in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, somewhere, that had to do with taxation or some silly issue like that. It was very, very quickly put down by the National Guard, which had to be federalized before it could be used. And the problem with federalizing the National Guard to serve as an interim wall is it begins to rub up against the same concept of posse comitatus. So once again, the idiot in chief has been taking legal instructions from the Attorney General instead of his 10-year-old son.
Well, that's the first thing I think when he said that. It's like, so where are the orders from the governors of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas to do this?
Yeah.
And I'm a Canadian.
Yeah. I'm sure Jerry Brown is just dying to to turn over the California State National Guard to the control of the Romanovs of Fifth Avenue. So it's once again just a big to do. But it's interesting. I was thinking today about tonight's WTF, and the evolution of his war cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
It's remarkable to see. I got to tell you, when you see Tillerson, who is everything that Donald Trump wanted to be and could not,
yes,
all those years in private life, in so many ways. And Lord knows I'm not a fan of Exxon, and I'm not a fan of multinationals, and I'm not a fan of corporate America, and I'm not a fan of Rex Tillerson. But when you find yourself looking at Rex Tillerson as an enlightened spirit compared to the President of the United States, you are in a shitload of trouble.
That's a very nice way to put it, because this round of wholesale replacements, because you didn't tell Sonny Boy that his drawing was nice enough to put on the fridge. We have Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohen, gone.
Yeah.
National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, who's crazy enough already, gone.
Yeah.
And then Rex Tillerson, gone. These are not light, this isn't a job that Omarosa had. These are real jobs. And they can't stay because they're not waving Dotard's flag, or what?
Well, I got to tell you, the purge of the cabinet is more interesting. I mean, as you well know, and as your listeners and my fans, quote unquote, know well, I'm not a conspiracy guy theory. Have never been. I think it empowers too many idiots with enlightenment and the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time. But the 25th Amendment, and I'm not suggesting that the 25th Amendment will be applied to Donald Trump, although it seems to me when it was passed, some visionary had him in mind, and not just because someone got sick or shot or something. The 25th Amendment, as well as the order of secession for the presidency, includes cabinet members, and the vote for the implication or for the triggering of the 25th Amendment comes from the cabinet. So you gotta wonder, at what point did someone whisper in the ear and say, you got some guys that are publicly calling you a moron, and won't apologize. You got other major political players who think that your diapers are leaking into your brain sac. You've got 150 of the country's leading forensic psychologists and psychiatrists saying you're a lunatic. So maybe you need to fill your inner circle with fellow travelers, people who are also mad men. I would say mad women, but there's only one woman in the cabinet, and she's on her way out to who knows what's going on with her. But, he has surrounded himself not just with, increasingly, quislings, because he's always had quislings, but quislings that I like to draw the comparison to religions. I have no problem with people who talk to God. My problem has always been those people who believe God answers them. And he has filled the cabinet with people that you remember 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, a year ago, there was that televised cabinet session where they went from member to member to member to member who basically threw themselves on the ground and started screaming in tongues without leaving their seat about how honored and privileged and wonderful it was to serve the Grand Poobah. And that coordination of quislings, of mindless, step and fetch, inexperienced, ignorant, failed excuses for human beings was not enough for him. So now he has brought in, the experts in enhanced interrogation techniques, brought in those who who, want to go to war against, take your pick. One day it's Venezuela, the next day it's Syria or not Syria, the next day it's Russia or not Russia, the next day it's Iran. I'm still convinced that he is going to attack Kenya just to find the birth certificate. We have gone from a war cabinet, we have gone from a Goldman Sachs war cabinet to a Hollywood lunacy film. But it's going to get more interesting day by day, and it's also fascinating. And I know it's not a show where we're going to discuss law, but I'm getting a kick. I've never had a client in 30 years of practicing federal law who leaped for joy and said, "Praise Jesus, I'm home free," because I told him, "Oh, you're the subject of a criminal investigation as opposed to a target of a criminal investigation." Ultimately, they are a distinction without a difference. The subject of an investigation is the person that is in the crosshairs of the investigation. The target is the specific purpose at a specific point in time. There is no difference. The difference would be if someone is designated as a witness. That is not what the idiot in chief has been designated. So I expect this just to get crazier. But on the other hand, look, Mueller is, a smart guy. I mean, he threw a bone. He got a little breathing room. Sessions is, wearing his red, white, and blue sheet this weekend somewhere. They've declared war on California. We have a person soon to be questioned by the Senate Committee on not Foreign Relations. I'm not sure which committee. I forget oversees the CIA appointment, which Senate subcommittee.
Intel.
But Intel. All right, the Intelligence Committee. You've got someone who was an admitted felon. Not that I think being a felon is a problem, but I mean an admitted felon in the context of someone who has obstructed justice, destroyed evidence, lied to basically Congress, who posed against the backdrop of tortured persons, who was the local chief of the unit in Thailand that was involved with the torture of who knows how many different people, but Abu Zaid, just to name one, and many others. I mean, and Abdul al-Nashri. I mean, one of the real interesting issues for me, though, is I've heard for 15 months that the deep state wanted to purge the government of the progressive, enlightened, caring, and developed mind and reach of Donald Trump, and that the deep state was being manifested through Pompey and other career fascists. At times I heard even Bolton's name. So is this sort of a security move that instead of allowing the deep state to topple him, he has simply empowered them publicly and brought him into his cabinet? So now is the deep state a deep, deep state or a deep, deep, deeper state? I mean, we went from the CIA controlling the government to now the CIA fawning at the knees of Donald Trump. So
I think
on so many levels, it's just such a train wreck, well beyond in waiting. Did the market drop 14,000 points today? Because it's interesting. I saw something today that the tariffs imposed by China today fell by 80 to 90% on almost all of the districts, all of the congressional districts, all of the states that voted for Trump. But again, there, I guess I'm a cosmopolitan elite, as Stephen Miller would say.
Okay, now I'm being told that people can hear us. So if that's the case, I'll just wait for confirmation of that. Rabbit, text me again if you can hear us right now. If you can, then I'll just take off my headset and we'll both go off my cell.
That's fine.
Oh my God, what a fucking pain.
Yeah, listen, I'm telling you. Listen, I'm
Okay, yeah. She can hear us both. Okay, so
cool.
This is the way we're doing the show now.
That's fine. Listen,
God damn it.
day and age flexibility.
Oh, well,
Yes.
what I started to say when I lost you, which means probably lost me too, must have. Tillerson leaving really was no big surprise. He's differed with Trump over a lot of things: Qatar, Russia, NATO, COP21, Paris Climate Accord, what to do with Korea. That's no surprise. And like I said, it just makes it obvious that you have to worship, the madness of the king, or you're just not good enough. It doesn't matter. McMaster, I think, was the same thing. I think he just got pissed off having to walk back things that Trump would just blurt out, and he had to go. But what I've really found looking for stuff getting into this show is how Pompeo, ever since he got in, been overstepping his position, lining himself up beside Trump, trying to come off as the guy he can depend on inside the White House. Do you think that that's what got him this job?
I think Pompeo got the job for three reasons. Number one, he's got a clearly documented and long history of loving violence. There is a bully component to this guy when he sat in Congress that he expressed regularly. He has the ability to walk the halls of Congress, knows where the skeletons are, and as do other people know where his are, something that Tillerson never had the capacity to do. And he's the ultimate sycophant. He is someone who has, within a very short period of time, elevated himself from an unrecognizable mouth closet of the halls of Congress to the closest advisor to the President of the United States. And he provides Trump the one thing, well, there are a number of things that Tillerson never provided Trump. But he certainly provides Trump the ability to do exactly what he says, exactly how he wants it said, and exactly at the time he wants it said and done. The State Department historically, it's interesting because when I was thinking about the show, I started to think back over my own not short period of adulthood in this country. And while the State Department has historically, put aside for the moment the fact that the State Department has been completely gutted. Put aside for the moment the fact that there are dozens of key, important positions that are unfilled, ambassadors, advisors, consultants, coffee boys and girls, just lying there empty. That aside, and it remains to be seen if he gets selected, and I'm not so sure he is. Something interesting is developing around him. I think he may be the first person in history to go before a full Senate vote having lost in the Foreign Relations Committee. I think Rand Paul may end up being his end. It really depends on what Paul wants in exchange for his vote from Trump. But so you have these two issues. You have issue number one. You have a State Department that's completely gutted. You have a State Department that has been run by Kushner and Ivanka and Trump, whose idea of the State Department is Chinatown in New York City. And traditionally, historically, you've had some very serious, you may like them, you may not like them, you may agree with them, you may not agree with them, but traditionally you've had some serious heavyweights at times in there. And
Yeah.
I'm not including, Hillary Clinton in that crew. But there have been some very serious people, and many of them have often clashed quietly with the president, especially a president who has zero experience, zero knowledge, zero understanding of international affairs, international politics, international law, international relationships. So on some levels, there's two things. Assuming Pompeo gets the position, and he may not.
Yeah.
If party lines go party lines, and if Paul sticks to where he's at, depending upon what happens with McCain, he may not get it. But if he does get it, the two most important issues to take a look at is, number one, is he coming in to destroy what little is left of the State Department? And number two, whether and to what extent he will simply be a coffee boy for Donald Trump. That remains to be seen. I mean, he's got a well-established record of support for. He supported the attack in Iraq. He has supported war crimes committed by us and our proxies throughout the region. He has a developing relationship with the Saudi prince and GCC. He would go to war to drop of a hat against Iran. He would. The other interesting issue to see is how it plays out with Russia, because he's been a saber rattler with Russia in the past, and we certainly know that. The last thing in the world Trump wants to do is to rattle any sabers when it comes to Putin. So that'll be an interesting issue to watch. He has also in the past spoken about, militant positions in terms of Venezuela, which has a significant, impact upon the hemisphere. We see that, I don't know whether he was the one or whether it was Mad Dog Mattis. Who, listen, when the voice of reason is nicknamed Mad Dog, whether he was the voice of reason, but, it started out yesterday with Trump announcing the U.S. is withdrawing from Syria. And quite frankly, I don't give two shits, because my position in the Middle East and in the Gulf and in parts of Africa has been for years: declare victory, withdraw, and goodbye, and let national liberation movements in the future work their way through. But, you had Trump announcing that he was done in Syria and the guys are coming home, and then all of a sudden today it's a revisit, it's a rethink, it's a remake. I'm not sure how much, Putin is going to appreciate that at their, upcoming summit, which hopefully will be at Trump Towers in Kenya. So there are really all these questions about Pompeo. And the other question ultimately is, it's conceivable that, even with, and I think Gina Haspel has very little chance of being approved. I don't think she has much chance. I think they're so backed up. So what you really have is a Secretary of State will continue, and an ex-CIA director, if he gets the position of Secretary of State, will continue to oversee the CIA.
Wow.
To some degree. There'll be deputies running the office, but he'll still be passing. And that's another issue, which historically there has been by design a built-in check. Even though ultimately, at the end of the day, the so-called intel communities talk about an oxymoron, and the State Department and domestic intelligence agencies, at the end of the day, they typically come together as a uniform front, the perfect example being the weapons of mass destruction bullshit over Iraq.
Yeah.
But typically, by design in the U.S. government, there is supposed to be friction between the intel community and the State Department.
Yes.
Because they serve different purposes and functions. Very different ones.
Well, there was a time when State and the Pentagon were very rarely aligned. Now they're very rarely not.
Oh, I know. I mean, this wartime cabinet is. But I have hopes with the parade, the military parade coming up that, that in and of itself will be enough to find housing, food, and medical care for every homeless and shelterless and impoverished veteran in the United States. But, of course, we're going to have tanks and, hail and heil to the chief. So there's just so many variables that are out there. I mean, it is completely. I mean, there is now a new scandal with Pruitt.
Yeah.
That even though yesterday, I'm not talking about the $50 a night room, by a lobbyist who's getting sweetheart non-competitive bids assigned to him. There's a new scandal apparently where there were allegedly some kickbacks and some paybacks and some payoffs, and people getting non-competitive bid contracts under his aegis. So he now may be gone. Yesterday he was in. It's just total insanity. And I got to tell you, I have lived through. It's 50 years ago today that King was assassinated.
Yes.
And I remember as clearly as yesterday the assassination. I mean, I was a high school student who was part of a marching band that had gone to perform on behalf of our high school at the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. When the assassination occurred, it was canceled, and we got back on our buses, and we drove all night long from D.C. back to New York with escorts of state police as we crossed the borders with the skies of urban America on fire. I remember it well. I remember the death and destruction, domestic, international, like it's yesterday. But I got to tell you, I cannot recall a time in my adulthood where I have seen greater lunacy, a greater lack of sophistication, of intellect, of experience, of vision, even good or bad, than in this administration. It is unparalleled in my lifetime.
Oh, I'd have to agree with that. Certainly in mine as well. But as the revolving door picks up speed, how much further down into the barrel is he going to be reaching? I mean, like you said, this is like a chain reaction when the starting point is so flimsy, and then when it comes down to kiss the ring or there's the door. I mean, even with Tillerson, who now in hindsight was considered an adult in the room,
Yes.
Someone with absolutely no experience in diplomacy, he refused to hire people. So, I mean, and look how many people just took early retirement or just quit because they wouldn't work for him.
Yeah.
If that starts spreading to every department, this is going to be a problem that's going to take a very, very long time to repair. When he's filling the positions with people like Pompeo, who graduated West Point, Harvard, served 3 terms in the House from Kansas' 4th District, and all his fundraising to get into office in Kansas came from the Koch brothers. And he is a climate change denier. He is the exact wrong thing that America needs going forward. I don't understand why this is just so blatantly ignored by all media, basically.
Well, the problem is every morning, I get up very early in the morning and I turn on the news for a half hour and then I read, just to see what disasters befell the world as a result of the Romanovs from overnight. And then I just go about my day and my work and what I have to do. I mean, this is an administration. This is a president. This is a oligarch. This is a fake, a fraud, who has spent his entire life creating fires to distract from the reality of his emptiness. This is someone who is very good at deflecting, running the course from bribery to kickbacks to racism to attacks on women to attack. I mean, this is a guy whose idea of leadership is to pillage and plunder and steal. This is a guy, the more desperate he becomes, the more desperate he acts. And
Yes.
even though he's now jumping up and down because he's gone, he thinks, from a target to a criminal investigation, unprecedented in American history, to a subject of an investigation, unprecedented in American history, I'm still convinced that there are any number of inner circle folks, including family members, that are going to be charged criminally. And as that happens, and as he grows more desperate, and as he grows even more fixated on survival, he will continue to fall upon, the Trump Tower, the Trump University model of existence and survival. Bullshit, sell, steal, threaten to sue, don't sue, bribe, destroy Atlantic City, open companies, see them fall, see them fail. I mean, his view has always been a new bankruptcy, a new racist attack, a new theft, a new gangster in your circle, and I live for another day. This is not one who cares about, although he talks about his position in history already, this is not one who cares about anything but survival. And at this point in time, with a base that remains relatively intact, although I suspect it's dropping a bit and will continue to drop, he just continues to throw raw meat. It's interesting. This is a guy who ran for president never expecting to win president.
Yeah.
And so he cut as many deals as he could. He twisted it as often as he could. He got ready to open his TV station, and one day he woke up and he was president. And he's now a president that doesn't expect to survive, which is bad news because maybe he will and fool us all, especially me. And so what he's doing is just desperately, fighting and yelling and jumping up and down and bullying and doing the Trump thing for as long as he can.
I want to say a little more about the transition from director of the CIA to Secretary of State, because even for Pompeo's confirmation for CIA director is pretty clear where he stands on a lot of things. He wants to keep Guantanamo Bay open. He thinks Edward Snowden should get the death penalty. He wants to restart domestic surveillance on the scale that we've had, or even more, who knows? I mean, you would kind of expect that from the director of the agency. But now that person is Secretary of State. There must be allies that are shitting, never mind enemies, with this. Because if you allow the agency in your country covertly, if there's a black site in your country, you could always go to the Secretary of State if things got out of hand. Well, now the Secretary of State is probably the guy who opened the black site. What do you do now?
Well, look, I have, I'm stumbling for words in a life that I've never lost for words. I have enough faith that there are world leaders, good, bad, somewhere in between. There are those that are going to manipulate it. There are those that are going to play it, but I think the vast majority of them are going to ignore it. The interesting thing is, for those people in the early days, and I'll get back to your point, of his administration that continued to defend him because he was an anti-war, non-interventionist, non-regime building candidate. The irony of it is he's ending up declaring the greatest war of all at this point within the United States. This is someone who admires autocratic rule, reign, and terror all over the world. This is someone who sees absolutely nothing wrong. it's interesting. I'm sure he still doesn't get why there's a need from a legal standpoint to have a Guantanamo Bay offshore and not domestically within the United States.
Yeah.
I'm sure he still doesn't understand the concept of the application of the writ of habeas corpus and due process and all that panoply. And, the interesting thing is, in a strange sort of way, those people that have, the handful of people that have gone trial, and there have not been many, in Guantanamo Bay for terrorism and material support for terrorism have done far better under military tribunals than they have in the United States under the Department of Justice.
Interesting.
Salam Hamdan, who was Osama bin Laden's chauffeur,
Mm-hmm.
and who was the precedent-breaking case of Hamdan v. United States, which had the first sets of tribunals declared unconstitutional for all sorts of reasons, ended up being convicted and essentially got a 5-year sentence or time served. And the last time I was in Yemen, before it became, target practice for Saudi Arabia, I spent a week with Salam Hamdan because he was a witness and very helpful on Abu Ghraib. But it's he said to me, we were talking about it one day, and he said, the irony of it is I've got people I know, I've heard of, I've read about, I've seen that are doing life sentences in the United States who did far less than what I did, and I'm home. And I suspect I got way more justice out of military tribunals and the process that was designed to give me a modicum of due process than any of the others have received in the United States. Now, the way to close Guantanamo is to make sure that Trump understands that, and he'll close it tomorrow. It's interesting because I get a lot of young lawyers and law students, that want to engage me in, broad questions and discussions about international law and the application of international law to both domestic and international issues. I'm in the midst of writing a very long piece on international law and international controversies, and it's almost impossible to predict where we are at, let alone where we are going. I have been among the most vocal and among the most verbal for years, and it's why I'm not widely respected in the traditional bar, in attacking a judicial system, whether it's domestic or the application of law internationally, that we operate under. But yet, I find myself within the last 14 to 15 months longing for the kind of predictability and somewhat uniform application, even built upon an anchor of discrimination that we no longer have. It's just bizarre. The Department of Justice has been completely gutted. The Civil Rights Division is gone. Consent decrees are ended. Federal oversight is dissipated. We have again remilitarized police departments all over the United States. You have police executions in the country being described as of only local concern. Mm-hmm. You have, cases being, surveillance cases being resurrected that are bizarre. It is simply, it's funny how, in a strange sort of way, the Department of Justice took a position against the ability of plaintiffs, descendants of people that were killed allegedly by Palestinian terrorists who were seeking damages from the Palestinian Authority, actually the PLO, and the Department of Justice opposed it. And everyone is jumping up and down and railing and ranting and raving and saying, "My God, whoever expected this?" And what they fail to understand is that the primary focus of the opposition is there's no causation. There was no claim that the particular harm that was challenged and brought a jury verdict was connected to the entity that's got the deep pockets. The reason why they're taking that position is if they took the opposite position of collective culpability, they open themselves, both individually and internationally, to the same standard. So again, let's not look at this as an enlightened gesture by a repressive regime as much as another sitting on the 26th floor of Trump Tower and saying, how do I screw over Atlantic City? I mean, it's bizarre.
I agree. I mean, we'll get to that with John Bolton. I mean, he was instrumental in getting the United States to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. Why? To prevent Americans from being brought before it. That's pretty obvious. But when we were talking about preparing this show, I came up with some rather lively metaphors. But I'm just curious if you think I'm way off or closer to the mark than I should be when I say what I expect the relationship between Trump and Pompeo to be would be similar in relationship, not necessarily politics, to Adolf Hitler and Joachim von Ribbentrop or Joseph Stalin and Andrei Molotov. Isn't it the same relationship?
It is. Well, there's also one of Bozo and
Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yeah, I mean, it's this runs the gamut of. Look, Trump has always admired, respected, adored, tried to emulate authoritarian individuals. He is the smartest guy in the room. There is nothing that is off the table. We are talking about a guy, that not only picked up, and forget about, I'm not going to get into the whole Russia-phobia, Russiagate crazy crap. I don't care. The very weak, and it's interesting because the sanctions themselves, there are no sanctions. The sanctions would have been to freeze money of oligarchs and multinationals on both sides. This game of I'm kicking 40 people out who can be replaced with 40 different people the next day, or I'm closing a building and the new building can be opened the next day, looks good on paper, but it's meaningless. If it really had any teeth, if either side wanted to go after either side, there'd be sanctions against oligarchs, there'd be sanctions against multinationals, there'd be sanctions against offshore accounts. But the very weak,
that's not happening.
No, it's not happening. The very week that Trump tries to flex his muscles and turns around and basically adds sanctions to, the 13 so-called Russian botnets who have already been indicted, he picks up a phone, he calls Putin, that's fine, I have no problems, I hope the PP tapes are good, I hope the pedophilia ring is strong, and, congratulates him on his election. I guess it's his 18th year in office. And, then he turns around and calls El-Sisi.
Yeah.
To congratulate one of the most repressive, fascist, and deadly autocrats in the world. A guy who's there by virtue of a military coup, who has ordered the extermination, the murder of thousands, who has disappeared tens of thousands, who has imprisoned who knows how many thousands for the rest of their lives in showcase trials where 300 people are put in the cage in the courtroom, and within 36 hours they're convicted and sentenced either to death or life in prison. And this guy called them up and congratulates them. So, I mean, what's the takeaway from this? The takeaway is between the Paris-based parades, between who would have figured that the military cabinet wasn't violent enough for him? I mean, go figure. He's had to replace it with a spook cabinet now, or tried to. It's amazing. I mean, it's simply amazing. And what's most frightening of all is, the stories floating around that now he feels like he's catching his breath. He's learned the game. Well, hopefully he invited, all the Fox News inner circle to spend the weekend at Mar-a-Lago with him. So the next thing you know is he goes on this rampage about immigrants again, about refugees. He's told that there is this army of 347 million brown-skinned people marching from Kenya. Somehow they got into Latin America, and they're coming across the border to engage in armed struggle with what? Wall Street?
It's insane.
It's just, there's nothing. So, when you pose the metaphors to me, the examples, I mean, they're all applicable, but they change like the spring wind. Like melting snow. It's just one day leads to another. It's just so amazing, the numbers of controversies, of lies, of I mean, watching him go after, the U.S. postal system today for, whatever the latest, it's insanity. He just looks at you and he lies. He just says what he wants to say. And it plays to a certain crowd. And so the key is with people like Pompeo is to turn around and just play the game. But you hit it in the head. This is a game that is very dangerous. I cannot imagine what a session between Trump and Kim would be like. I just can't imagine it. Looking at Kim as the voice of reason in the room is really frightening.
Do you think there is a chance that Pompeo will not be approved?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a chance.
Okay.
I think that I think Rand Paul is the key. I think that if they vote across party lines in the committee and Paul shifts, he will not get the nomination. He won't get through the committee, but there is a safety valve that still allows it to go to the Senate. And I think there's a chance he may not get it in the Senate. You don't need many Republicans to switch.
Yeah.
And it's done, one or two here or there. It remains to be seen. I never thought I'd be saying, God, I hope that that McCain hangs on for life for just a little bit longer. I mean, I think he's having a come to Jesus, and he wants to rewrite a very dark and ugly history as a senator for his entire career. But go ahead and do it.
Better late than never.
Yeah, no, I mean it's very. I think there's a chance he may not. I think there's also a chance if he does not. Look, there are so many people waiting in the wings to go through committee, to go through questions. And here we are. We're already in April. The campaign for, the vote is about to begin full on. I don't know of many Republicans that are, running around touting, Trump as a means to holding their position or winning a position. Hopefully the Democrats will be mature enough to spend less time beating up Trump and more time trying to convince people that in the midst of the madness they actually have some plans. I am optimistic because of the numbers of newbies, in particular women and young women, that are running for office. I am optimistic that the gerrymandering is being knocked down. It's interesting because even with the Supreme Court, with Neil Gorsuch's appointment, the gerrymandering bills, which are very important, are not going in the direction that the Republicans need them to go.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think the last time I was on your show, I talked about it, and again, I emphasize the most important power that the President and the Senate has is with the federal judiciary. And what started out with a bang with lots of his people, and a number of his people being appointed without much question, has begun to drag now, both because they're backed up on the review process and because, when you're nominating people to sit as a judge on the Court of Appeals and you've never tried a case, you've never argued an appeal, you've never written a brief, your primary claim to fame is you write a blog about intergalactic space travel, people on the committee look up and say, well, that's nice. Nanu Nanu Shazbot, Code 3. So that's begun to slow down a bit. That is the most alarming aspect. If the perfect example, the reason why I say Trump, although he talks about his legacy already, and the reason why I believe it's really about pillage and plunder in the short run and getting as much as he can before he's done one way or another, is if he was really concerned about institutional and structural change, he would be plucking conservative jurists in the Scalia mold pass the nomination procedure. That's the way he controls the next two generations. But he's not. And now he's torn in so many directions. He's dysfunctional on so many levels that he's lost focus of the one area where I believe him to be the most dangerous. And it's interesting because at least twice a week he gets kicked in the ass by a district court judge who says you can't do what you want to do. So one would think that having had your ass kicked by a district court judge, including Republican district court judges, saying basically you're a schmuck and you're an idiot, that you might want to sit down with some people that have half a brain and say, all right, what do we need to do here to change this process? And what they're going to say is we need to pack the court. That's what worries me more than anything else. I mean, of course, there's always the chance that in the middle of the night we'll wake up and, there'll be nuclear weapons going back and forth. So that's always a chance.
But again, it highlights all the bluster and talk about the international war, but the real war is domestic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's
there is a war within this country right now. Look, I don't want to raise the red, white, and blue. People who know me know I've never done that. Until the day I die, I'll burn the flag. But yes, we are talking about a country that was stolen from Indians, built by genocide and slavery, denied women the right to vote forever, that just still has the badges and incidents of slavery. But there are still some signposts of independence that are dramatic and essential, such as the First Amendment, such as a free press, such as due process and equal protection, such as enfranchisement. These are issues that are dramatic, that set the tone of who we are and where we're going to go.
Yeah.
And I don't remember a time in my adult history when I feared as much for these core considerations. When I hear evangelical bishops, whatever they're called, on television, praising the move by the administration, it's about to challenge the prohibitions on lobbying by not-for-profit religious entities. And when someone mentions the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and the Free Exercise Clause, and the evangelical looks at you like you're talking tongues without throwing yourself on the floor. These are the issues that concern me. These are the kinds of issues, the domestic war. Look, white boys don't fight white boys anymore. It doesn't happen. It ain't going to happen. I'm not worried about I'm not worried about Putin and Trump, and white boys just don't fight white boys anymore. Those days are gone. The browning of the world, the browning of America, the re-establishment of political connections and power, that's where it's at. Could Trump, go sit with Kim? I mean, if Kim's smart enough, they'll offer him, 12 girls and 3 hotels, and they'll make a deal. Waking up one morning on the wrong side of the bed and deciding to push a button worries me. On the other hand, I'm convinced that there are some guys, they've taken the batteries out of the code. I just can't imagine, getting an order from the President of the United States to launch a first launch and doing it. I mean, so I'm not that concerned. Yes, there are explosive issues. The issue with Iran, at the end of the day, the United States is not going to get involved with even with the prodding of Israel, is not going to get involved with the traditional, with nuclear weapons vis-a-vis Iran, and they're not going to get involved with the traditional warfare with Iran, because Israel can't fuck with them traditionally, and neither can the United States these days. They just can't for so many reasons. Whether the Crown Prince wants to put a suit on and talk shit and say that that Jews have a right to a home of their own. You can do the whole dog and pony show. It's just not going to happen. But the domestic war, the domestic change is frightening, because we have had a modicum of Republican freedom, and I don't mean Republican Party, but as in a republic, that has allowed us to evolve and to move and to grow in certain ways and for certain futures and generations that are under siege right now. This endless ad nauseum debate, especially from the left, which is so disturbing to me, about Russia, I don't give a shit about. It's a waste of time. It's deflection. It'll go where it will go. I keep hearing about the fundamental attack on free press, and yet the only people I see doing a fundamental attack on free press or trying to shut it down and move it or control it is the White House.
Yes. And the FCC.
I mean, it's not coming as part of this, quote, McCarthy-like revenge. We are in very bizarre times where, you have both the left and the right can't go 3 sentences in a conversation without pointing to the deep state.
Well, it's good clickbait. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre. I have a very public position on some of the cults of personality in the world, and people just don't get it. And, I had someone lecture me, a high-profile, a high-persona person lecture me the other day about the need not to cherry-pick, but to build coalitions.
That again.
Yeah, it had to do with me maintaining consistency in my politics and my principles. It was more important to flush them down the toilet, to light a candle and sing Kumbaya.
Oh.
What can I say? You've been there, the dog and pony show.
Well,
so
the next domino to fall in this little chain leaves an opening at the director for the Central Intelligence Agency, and the nominee is one Gina Haspel. She's been with the agency since '85. She was promoted and became chief of staff to Jose Rodriguez, who was the director of operations for counterterrorism. Now, without approval from the White House or the Department of Justice, Rodriguez ordered Haspel to destroy 92 VHS tapes of the Abu Zubaydah interrogations, which she had initially been instructed to keep. And when the Senate found out, it led to the 7,000-page report on enhanced interrogation, which also certainly didn't help the Bureau, or you would think the people at the top of that pyramid. But, there's a couple pictures in the slideshow about the interrogation techniques that were made legal by the Bush White House: isolation, white noise or loud music, continuous light or continuous darkness, restricted diet, shackling, sleep deprivation, shaving them, and with Muslims, that's a big deal, stripping them, diapering them, hooding them, making it very cold, and that's only the standard measures. Then we have the enhanced measures. Now, when enhanced measures were used, it was procedure to have medical and psychological presence while it was done. The enhanced measures were open-handed facial slaps, facial hold, walling, which was a procedure of having someone shackled and just keep pushing their head into a wooden wall. Positions of kneeling, forehead on a wall, cramped confinement, standing against the wall, using insects, and, of course, waterboarding. So, I mean, at the time, it was, and from tradition, it is that when you get busted doing something like this, and the Senate Intel Committee orders a 7,000-page report, you would tend to think that you've pretty much hit the ceiling for your career in the agency, but apparently not for Gina Haspel. Now, Rand Paul did not waste any time at all to come out and say he would not be supporting the appointment of Gina Haspel as director. Would you agree that she's going to have a lot more trouble getting confirmation than Pompeo?
I think, in fact, she may be the compromise. I think that there may be some swing votes who will agree to vote nay on one and yay on the other. And, in fact, in a strange sort of way, if the White House had half a fucking brain, that may be one of the reasons why this 1-2 punch has been put together. I think her biggest crime is the stupidity of being caught. I mean, that bespeaks the kind of basic look. If you're going to be an assassin, you don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
If you're going to get, what she has done, what she approved, and you forgot. I think among her titles at one point or another was she was head of covert ops and head of the National Clandestine Service. I mean, this is a walking killing machine. This is, I like to, draw comparisons to the old James Bond movie where you always had, the very prim and proper, not unusual older woman working in the flower shop, working, cutting roses and having tea, and will look up at Bond and simply say, kill every one of them. See you, James. It's funny, when you were reading your list of techniques, I can't tell you how many cases I've had where those have popped up.
I'm sure.
I mean, my last major national terrorism case of Abu Ghraib, where he was renditioned from Jordan, and immediately the bag was put over his head and the muffs and the cuffs and, all the things that you listed. And, they finally gave up because he had nothing to give to them. And, the real telltale sign of whether someone is a real player or not is whether they rendition you and kidnap you and keep you offshore. Because if they return you to New York City on a direct flight, they know they've got nothing. But it doesn't matter because they sell it in any way that they can. But I can't tell you in how many cases that I've been involved in, directly or indirectly, whether representing accused, whether reaching out to witnesses in Gitmo or not, abroad, where this list of hell that you've described, was front and center. I during the preparation for Abu Ghraib, I spent a chunk of time in Kuwait with a group of a dozen guys of Gitmo. People that had been repatriated at some point in time, gone through the so-called reindoctrination program and were allowed back into the country. And, talking to these guys about what they went through, going from Bagram and, and Kandahar and then, Gitmo and then being released, and what was seen as the norm. And the proposed CIA director did it all willingly, gladly.
Yes.
Did not hesitate. I understand result. I understand true believers. I understand result-oriented persons. But when you have reached a point in your life, in your career, in your view and vision, no matter how much you want to wave a flag, no matter how much you want to rationalize that all goes to protect Mother Earth. And it requires you, not just requires, but welcomes you and you gladly embrace to torture and to terrorize and to, to batter and to abuse and to, human beings in the way that she willingly did, oversaw, and then destroyed evidence exposing it. Says this is not a human being.
Well, right to that specific situation, John Kiriakou was on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman not too long ago, March 14th. And, of course, everybody's familiar with John. John calls a spade a spade. Mm-hmm. And I'll quote what John had to say. He says, "She was a dreadful choice to be the deputy director. She's a worse choice to be the director. I think it's wonderful that there's a possibility of a woman heading the CIA. But there are 50 different women who are qualified to lead the CIA. It shouldn't be Gina Haspel. Call her Bloody Gina. She was always very quick and very willing to use force." There was a group of officers in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. When I was serving there, well, I hate to even make the accusation out loud, but I'm going to say it, who enjoyed using force. Yeah, everybody knew that torture didn't work. That's not even the issue. Lots of different things work. I think the answers to those questions of was it moral, was it ethical, was it legal, are very clearly no. But Gina and people like Gina did it because they enjoyed doing it. They tortured just for the sake of torture, not for the sake of gathering information. So, again, I say, not only are your enemies going to have an opinion of this move, but what about your allies? What about other countries like United Kingdom or the Five Eye countries, who obviously all have operations together, covert? So what happens if an Australian agent or a Canadian agent gets caught with an American now? They're going to be tortured. You know it. This is the problem I have with putting a known, admitted torturer in charge of the agency. It exposes people around the world. Why? So you can play tough guy to the home audience?
Well, there's a second component to this. I mean, and there are folks that I've debated this ad nauseum. By design, and yes, there have been crossovers. There have been periods, as there always are. I mean, there are serial killers. There are, people that, go into schools and slaughter children. By design, the CIA is precluded by federal law from involvement in domestic policies, activities, arrests, prosecutions, investigations by law. And it is done for a very good and solid reason. Have there been times, have there been occasions, have there been agents that have gone, as they say, Joni Sarah will kill me, and left the reservation? Of course. But when you talk about the head of the CIA, who, as you've just read from John's statement, who enjoys torture for the sake of torture, who enjoys brutality, who enjoys the sting, the stench, the pain and suffering, just for the sake of it. This is a person who, from an institutional standpoint, will have absolutely no problem whatsoever in crossing the line with regularity and systematic enforcement in terms of policies and practices, domestic, not just surveillance, domestic activity. I find it interesting that and people know I am no fan of Putin, and I have not been a fan of Putin for decades. It's got nothing to do with who gives a shit about the U.S. elections, that are outraged over the speed by which he has clearly dealt with his enemies in ways other than debate on TV. There's no difference in the United States. We have a long and sordid history political assassinations, of executions. We have typically, however, as with Putin apparently, maintained it overseas and elsewhere outside of the borders. I have no doubt that with a person such as she answering to Donald Trump that it is a very quick and short walk from extrajudicial assassination abroad to extrajudicial assassination, torture, or terrorism domestically.
I agree.
Once you decide that you have been empowered to make the call and you are the right person in the right time and place, it is very easy to apply it across the board. This is it's an extraordinarily dangerous individual.
Especially when you have the full backing of the White House.
Oh, yeah. Not just the backing, the respect. Because it's those autocratic extrajudicial policies which turn this guy on. I mean, he goes to the Philippines and comes back and says, we got to start executing pot dealers.
Yeah.
I mean, this is someone, it's interesting. This is someone who always used Cohen as his thug.
Mm-hmm.
He always intimidated, robbed from Peter to steal from Paul to bully Fred. That was what he did for decades. Well, now from the Oval Office, one day he wakes up and he goes, "Holy fuck! I got agents, I got spooks, I got bureaucrats, I got regulatory power, and I've got executive orders that I could do this across the board to anyone." And he's got this inner circle of advisors, domestic and international, that exude the kind of hatred and anger and violence and threat that is a challenge to the very core of the United States. Now, look, I'm not going to suggest to those listening in the audience that are rolling their eyes that we're going to, wave a wand and undo and erase a miserable history of racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and all those attacks based upon race and gender choice and sexuality and color and poverty. Yeah, it came out of there. It's still there. It's still running the show. But this is a new level of freak unfolded that is unmatched in U.S. history.
Indeed, it is.
Right now someone's sitting there saying, well, it'll be worse with Pence. God, I'd take Pence in 32 seconds over this regime. The guy will be so housebroken, he'll never leave church.
Well, that is a possibility.
Yeah, no, the Republicans will be desperate to save themselves, to resurrect, because, deep down, the Republicans really know. Deep down, these guys really know that, the Republicans control Congress. Republicans may control lots of agencies, lots of organizations. Donald Trump is not a Republican.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a thug. He's a thief. He's a con man. He's a fraud. And he's going to keep surrounding himself, as you pointed out, with whoever knows how to fawn and whoever knows how to play the game and whoever can look at him, as we had that Hare Krishna moment with the cabinet walking around and talking about how wonderful and great he was. That's what he is, and that's what he does. And so when you look and say to yourself, well, where are these appointments coming from? These appointments are coming from two areas. One, they are predictable. Two, they are controllable. And three, they will answer only to the king.
Sounds like what every authoritarian wants.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then we have the man with the mustache.
Oh, yes. Now, the first thing I want to quote from is from the New York Times, and it's an editorial from their board.
Fake news.
And the title is, Yes, John Bolton really is that dangerous. Yeah. And the first line is, the good thing about John Bolton, President Trump's new national security advisor, is that he says what he thinks. The bad thing is what he thinks. And he's argued for attacking North Korea, of course. He's argued for bombing Iran over a 30-year career in which he has served 3 Republican presidents, including at the UN, including as the State Department's top arms control official. Mr. Bolton has largely disdained diplomacy and arms control in favor of military solutions. Oh, okay.
Huh?
I just heard some big beep on my end.
No, I'm just trying to come to grips with why this review of Bolton is so supportive.
Well, at least they're just giving facts in the editorial, and at the end of it, they say that we think that either going to war with North Korea or Iran's not really a good idea, and that's about all they say. But even from Bolton's earliest days in government, he began in the perfect place for his type of regime-changing nation-building, and that was at the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. And he made wide use of USAID's freedom-promoting tools that the Reagan administration was so fond of. And at the end of the day, he was found to be involved in the Iran-Contra affair. What a surprise.
Yep.
Now, while he was at the UN, he was not only advocating for the first Iraq war, but he was very determined to have a 1970s-era UN resolution overturned that classified Zionism as a form of racism.
Yep.
Now, this is and of course, like I said, under George W. Bush, as Under-Secretary of State, he played a key role in the U.S. decision to leave the International Criminal Court, which exempted U.S. nationals from prosecution. And he said that withdrawal could be enforced by military intervention against The Hague. Like, what?
Yeah.
This guy has been out there as neoconservative and as Christian supremacist as you can get from day one, as far as Libya goes. He spent some time under Bush II dealing with Muammar Gaddafi. He opposed the deals that were ever brought up. All he ever wanted to do was bomb them off the face of the earth.
Yep.
Now he's also a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, another wonderful endorsement for someone to have. He's a notorious Russophobe. Now, how is that going to fit in?
Well,
good question.
Huh?
Good question. Like, how is this going to work?
Look, listen. I mean, of all the lunatics that are now floating around, he remains the most interesting, because this is a guy who talk about a true believer. I mean, this is someone who views Henry Kissinger as a progressive. This is someone who Kissinger viewed the world as a chess game.
Mm-hmm.
This guy views the world as a dartboard. The real problem is going to be those nighttime phone calls and discussions. Hopefully the personalities will clash enough. Because Bolton will sit there and will debate you, and will talk about law, and will cite statute, and will analyze history, and bring up all those intimidating guideposts of reality, not good reality, but reality, that overwhelm, bore, and dissuade Trump from spending more than 30 seconds in listening to you. So the real question is, how long will it take Trump to turn off to Bolton. I mean, he'll reach out to him when he needs the cover, when he needs it to sound and look good. But in terms of sitting around and engaging in a discussion, I mean, you're talking about a guy who says, look, I'll watch Fox News for my debriefings or my briefings every morning. So the real question is whether Bolton, how much independence, freedom, and flexibility will Bolton get from the White House? If he is left to his own accord, we're in serious trouble.
Yeah.
Especially with a rogue CIA, especially should Pompeo get the Secretary of State position. This is a triumvirate of violence, of outcome determinative view that is incredibly dangerous. I don't expect Trump to match with him for much longer than a few meetings. I think he will be rolled out to do what Trump wants him to do when he wants him to do it, and the rest of the time I think Trump will simply say, you're on your own, brother.
Well, I guess
it's precisely that you're on your own, which will make him the most dangerous figure in the United States.
Well, when he did serve temporarily a recess appointment as ambassador to the UN, which is all he could get, because even 15 years ago, the Senate committee would not support his confirmation for UN ambassador. He was already that toxic then. When he was back doing that, he was also instrumental with getting the U.S. out of compulsory inspections of their biological weapons program.
Mm-hmm.
But yet he stood there and clapped when the lies came out that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. It seems to me that he is of the same personality type as Trump. He will do anything, say anything to get what he wants, and he'll worry about the consequences later. And the reason he didn't get confirmed to be permanent UN ambassador was because of a story from the 90s when Bolton was with U.S. aid and other people were sent into places like Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan to administer these programs. And it turned out that everybody who had contracts were all buddies of Bolton, and shit wasn't getting done. And anybody who dared ask why stuff wasn't getting done would find themselves being stalked by Bolton, having letters pushed under their hotel room doors, degrading them, chasing people through the halls of the hotels, yelling at people in restaurants. And this is now the National Security Advisor.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a chance that he's just going to go power drunk and scream at everybody, and it'll be a very short amount of time before he gets just tuned out? But like you said, is that more dangerous than defensive?
Listen, he's not a Scaramucci.
Yeah.
He has spent a lifetime
Playing the game.
working his way into the position that he now has obtained. A position that is above and beyond approval by Congress. Come on, then, I want to go to bed. A position that leaves him the heir, E-A-R, of the most stupid person who's ever occupied the White House in our history. Someone who has the attention span of a 3-year-old. So there's no doubt. I suspect that Bolton at day's end, as the National Security Advisor, will end up being the point person on just anything and everything that has to do with international affairs, international relationships, international activities, with intelligence activities, with security activities, all rolled up into one. Because everything in the world of Donald Trump is national security. He says everything is national security, but then he turns around because he doesn't understand what real national security means, fails to understand or grasp the nexus between a healthy, happy, and developing society and security, just doesn't get it. His view is black boots and marching bands and walls and guns for national security, along with every other autocrat in the world. So, it's a blessing, or maybe it's not. I'm not quite sure how this marriage is going to work. As with the ability of the judiciary to raise hell and wreak havoc for generations to come, relatively quiet except for the periodic explosive judicial decision, he'll be able to do the same thing through back doors, through back channels, through agreements, through negotiations, through placements. So a lot of what he is going to be involved with is not necessarily going to be as explosive and in your face as the Attorney General or as a classic cabinet member. He certainly, Flynn was a profiteer. This is a guy who played the game his entire life and one day woke up and said, "I want $100 million." The most recent national security advisor was a career military guy who was a true believer, but brought to the table a marriage experience and vision and view that could balance sides of a discussion. Bolton's been sitting in a fucking think tank his entire life, thinking that everyone else is wrong and that they have the answer, and all they need is an opportunity to impose it upon everyone else, and he's going to try to do it right now, one way or another. My response when I heard that he was being selected, when even the rumors started to leak that he was leaning towards him, was, my God, we're all going to die. But that's another example of how we have an administration that is completely fucking lost.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, there's an awful lot of stuff that's come out about Bolton. A lot of it's rehash. I mean, the guy's been around forever. It deserves to be seen again. But the main thing I looked at was a 4-article series on Mint Press News by Whitney Webb.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think this brings us back to this portrayal of war outside the country, but it does nothing but create war inside the country. John Bolton has had a history of advocating for Israel to the point of costing the United States. There are some that say that Bolton was select of none other than Sheldon Adelson. For all the talk in the press and the underpress about Soros checks, I'm a hell of a lot more worried about Sheldon Adelson with the access he has, but yet we hardly ever hear about him. John Bolton has a dream of a new Middle East. He doesn't want a 2-state solution. He wants a 3-state solution where there is no Palestine. He wants to give Gaza to Egypt. He wants to give what's left of the West Bank to Jordan, and everything else becomes Israel. That's a solution? Are you familiar with the Balfour Declaration? My God. And he has also had a long time hard-on for Latin America.
Sure.
We just saw Rios Montt finally die just this week, which brought it all up. I mean, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Nicaragua. Bolton's all on board with all that crap that Reagan did, that Bush 1 did in Central America.
Yep.
And now there's the issue of Korea. What influence do you think that Bolton's going to have on any possibility of there being an actual head of state meeting between the United States and North Korea? Do you think it's over now? It's just not going to happen with Bolton and the team?
No. I think it'll happen, but I think it'll be a nice dinner and a nice toast, and there will be 1,000 Korean soldiers dressed in their finest march by and saluting the president, and he will consider it a great victory, and life will go on.
But there will be no solution?
No. Kim gets everything he has wanted out of a meeting. It's all he wants.
Okay. Again, for domestic audiences, right?
Absolutely. This is the first step. We're now meeting, we're now chatting, do you think it was by accident that this, quote, secret train ride from Kim to China was leaked? No. I mean, this is all for domestic consumption. In terms of Palestine, I mean, Bolton can, and it's funny because, we're talking about a lot of issues, and I've been working on this piece about the United Nations having outlived its usefulness and how it could be resurrected and why, and going over examples of war crimes and crimes against humanity and acts being carried out in genocide in Yemen and Palestine and Lebanon and a host of other areas. And it's all, it covers this range. Look, he and the Saudi prince can call for a 4-state solution, a 5-state solution, a 6-state solution. He can try all day long to argue that the West Bank is really Jordan and that Gaza is really Egypt, because at one point they were controlled by Egypt, and one point they were controlled by Jordan, for lack of a better word. And under his vision and view of the layout, all that's left is Israel proper, and so thank you, goodbye. He can do the dog and pony show all day long. The problem is Palestinians ain't going away.
True.
Egypt, Al-Sisi, even with his 97% voter success, and it's funny, I'm convinced that the 3% didn't vote for him were only because he had people stuff opposition ballots for 3%. He's going to go so far, but he's not going to. He is not going to be the guy that is going to break the wall down to Rafah and move Palestinians into the Sinai. That ain't happening. And the Hashemites in Jordan, in a state that's 70% Palestinian, are not going to extinguish Quds or the West Bank. So Bolton can dance all day long about his view, his vision and view of the solution. It ain't happening. The fact that he envisions it, the fact that he talks about it, the fact that he sees it as a simple solution is so much Kushner saying, I've got the answer. It's interesting how at day's end we come down to an issue that I talked about before, and that is basically that white boys don't fight white boys. When you talk about the Middle East, when you talk about Latin America, when you talk about Central America, when you talk about Asia, you are talking about people of color. You are talking about the browning of the world. It's an odd statement considering the role of China and let's go inside, baby, China and Korea. But Bolton comes out of that body politic, that political consensus, that the world was divided solely by color and race and gender, and as long as it was controlled by the right color and the right gender, it's okay. So that's his perspective. We are now in a world that is growing smaller and browner and more Asian. We are in a world where internationally and domestically, the traditional stranglehold of white 55-year-old males, Christians, is going fast. No matter how much Trump may hold out the promise to people that fit into that niche, whether they have money or not, it's a false promise. It's only going to last so long. Unfortunately, as I said before, If he wakes up, hopefully he will not, and understands that it's the judiciary that can really bring about the changes he wants, then we've got bigger problems. We'll see. So the Boltons and the think tanks and the magicians that have waited for generations to get in the position they're now in, I suspect are going to do more stumbling than they thought.
There's one more topic that John Bolton has not had direct hands-on experience in the government on, but something that he's talked about from various platforms for quite a while now, is he has been imploring the United States to go on the attack in cyberspace.
Yeah.
This sounds like the quickest way to ruin, in my opinion, for the United States. Do you think that, considering we're going to have Pompeo at state, possibly Haspel at the agency, and now a national security advisor who wants to be offensive in the cyber arena, is there a lot of these clowns are all rubbing their hands and they don't really care what the end result's going to be?
Well, one of the problems of singing and playing Hail to the Chief, when you have a chief who lives for the second, not even the day, the week, the month, the year, or the term, is that the systemic limitations, the systemic safety valves, the systemic limitations on just jumping off the boat and screaming and yelling are gone. So sure, when you ask me, do I think it's possible that the administration housed with the leadership, the control that you've described, is liable to go running off in any direction? Absolutely. And ultimately, the saving grace. It's funny because I've dealt with Mueller and Comey on case basis levels for decades at various times, both in DOJ and the FBI. I'm no fan. I'm no friend. I don't hold either with much respect or courtesy. But there is this 800-pound gorilla in the room that is continuing to drive Trump nuts. Now, some people say that's dangerous. Some people say it's good. The disruption, his lack of focus, his being consumed with an investigation that is coming closer by the day is a good thing. I wish Mueller all the luck in the world. I can't wait for the orange jumpsuit, the specter of the orange jumpsuits to spread into the family and inner circle. There is a flip side. While he is consumed with that, it allows those that want to flex their muscles, those that believe they know better, and it doesn't take much to know better than Trump, those that have spent their lifetimes pursuing a particular geopolitical strategy, such as Bolton and such as the Queen of Torture and such as Pompeo, it empowers them to act in ways that all that Trump is happy about is, what at the end of the day can I get up and say to an audience in West Virginia? Give me something to talk about. So, we started this show almost several hours ago trying to define where we are at and where we are going. And I think the consensus between you and I and the audience that's been following us is that we have no fucking clue. I mean, there are just so many international and domestic variables right now. But perhaps the saving grace is what I just said and what you feel, wherever we may agree or disagree, is being shared by most of the world leaders and players as we speak.
Well,
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, well, isn't this always the unknown in international politics, in international intrigue, in international systems? This is always the intrigue. I mean, there are always those that want to change the way the game runs, but how do they go about it? And do they have any support? And will they end up only making the game worse anyway? And will that be allowed by the rest of the community? I think that's the biggest issue with Trump. It's the rest of the world. What are they going to do?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. There's always been predictable wiggle room, but I've got to tell you, Trump loves the lifetime president of China, who just shoved a tariff up his ass so far and deep yesterday and today. That he's sitting around and laughing and saying, "Really, Mr. Trump? Okay. You want to dance? We'll dance." There are leaders in the world. There are developing nations. It is a young world. There are liberation movements, those that speak about it and those that physically fight for it. The world is a changing place. People talk about millennials and people talk about this next generation of leadership. It's worldwide. And the notion that, look, and this may ultimately be the saving grace, because at day's end, Donald Trump just cares about Donald Trump. He doesn't care about anything the fuck else. Nothing else.
Yes.
He cares about his bald spot. He cares about his belly. He cares about Ivanka. He cares about, making sure people still believe he's a trillionaire or whatever it is. At day's end, this is a man that is totally stripped, devoid, and empty of any political vision, any political view, of any political purpose, besides promoting himself and staying young. And he's the notion of being an obese 71 or 72-year-old guy is terrifying him. Even though he's according to his doctor, who's now been appointed to the second most important, the second largest budgeted organization in the United States, is being headed by a physician who, once oversaw a blood bank. There's another example. He likes him. He looks good. He makes a big speech, and he lies for the president.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately, you got to wonder, and perhaps it is the tariff battle. Perhaps it is the fact that people who were running around jumping up and down because of the new tax laws, that they said, oh, it's going to multiply and mean so much to us, and now they finally are seeing it means nothing. And they're seeing, meanwhile, these other guys making trillions. Perhaps the base is reaching a point, I don't know. I mean, one of the real problems of the base, and it's interesting, is because, there's a side to his base that loves tweaking the beast. That even though they may talk about, better pensions and better retirements and more productive work and greater respect from their peers and colleagues and the ability to exercise their religious beliefs as they wish. I live in upstate New York, in a very rural community that I've slowly but surely begun to see the Trump signs on the lawns come down. A lot of these folks who I've talked to, they love tweaking the beast. And the beast in their mind is that scary city called New York, 100 miles from here, that they've never been to.
And that is a place where Trump is afraid to go these days.
Well, it's a place where not only is he afraid to go because of the demonstration. How do you rationalize, explain, justify, talk away, other than to accuse your own city of 35? Well, he was never a Manhattan guy; he was a Queens guy. But how do you, other than describing it as a place for cosmopolitan elites, how do you justify you get 20% of the vote in your home city? What do you say? Besides the cosmopolitan elites, besides those people that live on those mean streets, those dark streets, they voted against me. It's funny. I hearken back to post 9/11, where I was doing a ton of TV work in those days. I finally stopped radio shows, appearances, because the entire country was Islamophobic and people were under siege, and I felt the obligation, to be the public voice and face of opposition. I used to get these calls and visits and letters from people from Texas and Nebraska and Iowa that were furious at me for betraying my great city. And I said, what are you talking about, betraying my great city? You hate fucking New York. You call us that den of evil, a fucking cosmopolitan elites, whatever the term was in those days, and all of a sudden you're the great hero and proponent of my city? Come on, cut me some slack. So ultimately, there's going to be a lot of massaging, lots of role playing, lots of stretching, and we're going to see where it goes. I am worried about Bolton. Not worried about him as an advisor, but him as a unilateral actor. I am, I don't think that Lady Torture is going to make it. I think Pompeo is going to be a close call. And I think ultimately this administration, Trump doesn't see the need for a State Department. Does not see the need of it at all, because it's the United States against the world. And meanwhile, it's Trump against the United States.
Yeah, it's the visible conflict and the not so visible conflict. I mean, wasn't there a point in time where the Department of State was called the Department of War?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because some of the deep statists that are out there, they really long for the day when they could point to the State Department as being, the secret 800-pound gorilla in the room that was running all over the world and making decisions and controlling the dialogue and dictating international policy. It was so much easier back in those days. There is no State Department now. There's none. And I've got ex-clients, friends that are major political players and still in the Middle East and in parts of Africa that I've talked to, and they say we have no one to deal with. We have no one to talk to. And when we go to a local consulate or we get a call or we go to a dinner, we're talking to some 27-year-old graduate from Princeton.
Who's just happy to be there.
Yeah, it's wild. It's absolutely fucking wild. And my response is build a casino. It'll be fine. Just build a casino. It's all pillage and plunder.
Oh, my
Just take
God.
as much as you can, as quickly as you can.
Well, that made...
I've said for years, jokingly, that it's better to be closer to the end than the beginning. And never have I felt as strongly about that as now.
Well, there's enough indication for that to make sense.
Yeah, well, someone said to me the other day, who knows my family history, they said, wait a minute, the men in your family lived to their mid-90s. You got a long run ahead of you. And I said, none of the men in my family were as nuts as me. This is totally, it's completely off the wall. I don't know what it is like. I have a couple of young attorneys that are, part of doing international human rights law and part of even doing, domestic human rights law is being able to read political currents and to massage the moment, to be able to understand with a big view the nature of the beast, how it moves, how to move it, what to give and what not. That's a skill that I learned as a young anti-war activist, as a civil rights activist, as a human rights activist, as an organizer, as a social worker, as a lawyer. I've learned it. You learn it. It doesn't apply anymore. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a renowned human rights attorney in Brussels recently, and he's scratching his head because, part of the game of international human rights, for lack of a better word, and I hate to reduce, people and civilians and life and death to game. But part of the process is being able to not just massage the situation, but understanding the nature of the beast, of how much wiggle room there is, where they will go and where they will not go. It's not there. Doors slam, people get explosive because of the lack of predictability from this administration on so many levels.
Indeed, that goes right back to the first line on the show page. Once upon a time, it was accepted that as the world's only superpower, a certain degree of predictability, consistency would be reflected to everybody else, and that's not happening now.
Nah, and there's no promise of it holding out. There was a whistleblower who worked for the Department of Interior, who was on TV earlier today. He's a career guy who had a major responsibility for environmental work, and, impacts and studies, and he got reduced to pushing pencils, and he triggered the whistleblowing statute. And he's a guy who said, "Look, I've been doing this 30 years. I've spent 30 years of my life doing what I consider to be important work for my kids, your kids, my grandchildren, your grandchildren. When I say mine and yours, I don't just mean the United States. I mean the world.
Yeah.
I have spent 30 years trying to make this place a better place with a brighter future for all to do with it what they wish to do as they evolve." So I'm scared shitless. There's no rhyme, there's no rhythm, there's no heartbeat, there's no soul to it. You get a memo that simply says the following 37 regulations that have evolved and been put into place, environmental regulations, domestic regulations, they're gone, just gone.
Yeah.
I can't imagine why we would not welcome New York City and every major, every major urban area in North America being covered with smog because, the laws on the regulations pertaining to the environment, to smog, to gasoline emissions, to controls have been removed. And why? Because the theory is by removing them, corporate pillage and plunder will hit a new high, which means it'll filter down to 3 more people getting a job. And we'll worry about asthma and cancer and poison and toxicity and masks and all that good stuff. 20 years from now we'll figure it out. There's just no predictability. I recently spoke to a federal prosecutor. I was shocked to learn that he had left the Department of Justice. He was a major terrorism prosecutor, and I'd handled a number of cases with him. Good prosecutor, fought like hell, gifted, good trial attorney, battled. Some I won, some I lost. I never doubted his honesty and integrity. I disagreed with him over every issue of law, over every issue of fact. I found out he left the Department of Justice. So I called him up. He's a guy who's been in DOJ for, 20 years. And he didn't leave because all of a sudden he's got kids getting ready to go to college and he needed money. Because, for him, $125,000, $130,000 a year was fine. It was worth it. I enjoy it. I love it. My wife's an attorney. It's a family that worked. I said, what the fuck happened? He said, it's over. There's nothing left. He said, the things that gave me hope that I could be, fair, even where I was limited and hamstrung on some level with policies that impacted families and lives and communities, that it was not about paybacks and massaging and cutting and flexing to support a particular political persuasion, a particular political case, a particular political policy. It just wasn't about that, and it's all about that now. And that's why you see, I always call these the career DOJ AUSAs as true believers, but it gave a degree of predictability we're back to, of certainty. I know what makes this guy think, how to act, how to deal with him, what to get, where to push, where not to, and I got to tell you, if Trotsky were alive instead of Bernie Sanders and leading the revolution, I'd say cool.
Well, well, there is a certain familiarity to these things to Canadians, because you speak about people having their entire raison d'etre in their career disappear overnight. They're no longer relative. There's no longer any place for you here because there's a new sheriff in town. As far as the scientific community goes, and the diplomatic community and the legal community goes, Canada has seen all these games attempted already under one Stephen Harper.
Yeah.
And eventually, the people here said, no, wait a minute, this is bullshit. This stuff about the census in the United States now, Harper already pulled that game up here as well. We only want to know if we can demonize you. We don't want to collect any data that will inform us on how to govern. Yeah. We just want what works for us. So, that's all I can hold out at the end of the day, being on the north side of the 49th parallel, is that, Jesus Christ, will you people wake up?
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I'm about to, in the relatively, at some point down the road, as you know, I've been doing a lot of writing, and there's a lot going on, but I'm about to go back to the full-time practice of law at some point in the near, not too distant future, I suspect. And, there was a debate going on within my family and within my community whether I was going to stay here, whether I was going to teach. I've been saying for the longest, I got to get the hell out of here. And I keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I'm back into I got to get the hell out of there here. And then I talked to, buddies, friends of mine, international human rights attorneys from everywhere from Brussels to Germany to South Africa to Palestine, who are saying, we don't know. We are at a loss. It is just the pillage and plunder which we have. It's funny. Progressives have talked about, the pillage and plunder of Wall Street, and we have talked about the selfishness and the greed and the predator makeup of our countries, of our leadership, of our government entities, and it's always been true. But it again had an aspect of definition that could be addressed, could be approached, could be fought, could be manipulated, could be massaged. It is now completely open and for sale. It just is. You want a TV host to be president, you got him.
And just like a TV host, they're nothing without writers.
Yeah. Well, and so you got it's funny, at the end of the day, the one guy standing is Stephen Miller.
Wow.
Or Stefan, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but who has been a total fucking wingnut since he's 5 years old.
Indeed. Wow.
It's we shall see. It's interesting, difficult times. I'm not quite sure how, it's good to see. It's not good. Good is the wrong word. I am thrilled to see the arrival of a generation of activists, of people, women in particular, that are taking the lead, that are confronting the beast I'm very happy to see high school students and teenagers terrifying, Fox News. But the reality of it is they're not ready to take over the reins.
Yes.
They've got a while, to work through it and, to figure out who and what they are and where they want to go. But I got to tell you, there's some brilliant young kids out there that are moving mountains, and thank God for them. But you see the passing of the guard. You go back to Reagan. All right, Reagan's gone. And then you got the Bushes, and then you got Clinton, and then you got Bush again, and then you got, Obama. And, there always was a recognized process. More often than not, it was miserable. In the case of Obama, he's the only American president in history to be at war every day of both terms of his administration.
Yep.
He built Prison America. He embraced the surveillance state like no other. But look, he looked good coming out of the, he reminded me of Putin on some level. He looks good coming out of the water with no shirt on.
Yep.
Makes a nice speech. Lovely picture, beautiful family. But, there was wiggle room. A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. At the end of the day, we'd sit around, have a coffee, sit by the fireplace, have a discussion based upon experience, on history and tradition, on priorities, on future, on vision, on view. There ain't none of that shit now.
Yeah.
There's nothing of it. Oh.
Well, I guess somewhere, I would say maybe from Bannon, it's just this concussion method of process. Somehow, I think maybe the bankrupt businessman thinks this is his advantage to keep all the people who know what they're doing off guard.
Yeah.
But guess what happens at the end of the day when you close your eyes and you floor the gas pedal?
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
look at the bright side.
Okay.
Bannon now has a French interpreter and is finally at home with his meat and potatoes.
I guess.
How quickly they come and go. I'm still laughing over. He's apparently reaching out to the mooch again. The specter of Janine Pirro being an advisor. I knew Pirro when she was an ADA in the Bronx, an assistant district attorney. I was working for a judge. I wasn't even in law school then. I was a social worker, but the judge ran a drug court, and I ran a drug program, and I used to sit in chambers with him on cases. And she would come in as a young ADA and deal with cases, and then he would ask her to leave and counsel to leave, and we would discuss cases. And every time she would get up and leave, Ben Mermelstein, rest in peace, would look at me and say, "What a fucking idiot." I mean, and I'm going back to like 1975, 76. And then she became the district attorney of Westchester County and became a bigger fucking idiot. And now she's advising the president. The same thing with Sean Hannity. I mean, post 9/11, I did shows with this guy. And I once publicly said on the show with us, I said, "Come on, Sean, for $1 million, you'd put a headband on and sing Kumbaya." I mean, come on, let's not be serious here. All of a sudden, those persons that have become, the intellectual driving capacity and force of this administration.
And it's all about money at the end of the day to them.
Well, to them it is, and to Trump, it really, I'm not sure what it's about for him anymore.
Just ego. I mean, he's a classic megalomaniac. There's no other definition that works for me.
Yeah. I mean, he's 71 years old. I don't care what his doctor says. He's brain dead, obese, and not in good health.
Yeah.
He's totally lost. He hates his base, which fawns all over him, and he knows people with any capacity, understanding, logic, experience, wisdom, vision, think he's a joke.
Yeah.
I mean, he's lived this secret life on the 26th floor of Fifth Avenue for 50 years, surrounded by foreigners who, yes, and those that went out and paid and bought. And here he is at the center of the universe. You know, the guy, I often wonder whether not often, but I wonder on occasion that when he's home alone at night on the third or fifth or eighth floor, whatever the fuck that building has, and he looks back at the day, does he realize that he's lied 57 times? Does he realize that he has no clue of what he said or did during that day? But worse yet, does he care?
Yeah, I think that's the issue. I think that the very dark side of that is he may think that he lied 55 times today, and he smiles. Let's try and do 56 tomorrow.
Yeah. WTF.
Indeed. It just seemed like a natural title to me.
Yeah, it's yeah. As I said, I'm working on a piece, and I'm you know, I keep fading. I keep shifting in and out on where I'm going with it, and it's impossible to figure. I mean, I recently, you know, was asked to write a piece on an aspect of American law. And, you know, I researched it, I took a look, and there's, 27 cases that are pending right now that can cut in many different, and it's not legal advice on a particular case. It's just a very, it's for publication on an issue of due process and things like that. And, back in the day, slam dunk, thank you, goodbye, move on, we'll get this over. But, we live in strange times in a new place, in a new world. I was talking to an international human rights lawyer the other day. We had, I sued during about a month into the Israeli attack, the onslaught in Gaza in 2014. I sued Sisi, Egypt, and the African Union and the African Union's Commission on Human and Political Rights on the grounds that it was refusing refugees that were in danger to escape through Rafah. These were, civilians that had lost their homes. They were at the border crossing. Israel was lobbing bombs, and there were tanks, and fighting was going on. And Sisi wouldn't open the border. Yeah. So I brought an action in the African Union. And, there is this notion under international human rights law and also under administrative law in the United States, which requires you to exhaust administrative remedies before you seek collateral attack or before you move into the courts, unless the doctrine of futility kicks in, unless you can convince the venue you're trying to get relief from that it's futile to fight it out in courts. It's futile here under the Egyptian law to seek justice. It's futile. The doctrine of futility has become the rule in the United States now. It's just, it's interesting. I'm still waiting for Trump to explain, or for someone to grab Trump to explain why it was that the Dreamers Act, the Dreamers Program, DACA, was illegal and unconstitutional because it was an excessive exercise of executive authority and executive order power. But yet the travel and Muslim bans, which were executive orders, are not.
And the removal of all that EPA legislation was not, and on and on and on it goes.
Yeah. And at day's end, he just doesn't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
As long as he gets to, there was a union leader on TV the other day I saw who was, post-election was a big fan. It's going to work. We're going to do this and, make America great again and wag and blah and blah and blah and blah. And he lost his mind. He was ranting and raving and said, "Can I call myself an asshole on TV?" He said, "God, did I get hustled by this shit?" He said, I spent years watching this guy on TV and laughing at him. And all of a sudden I sort of got drawn into, through the humor, through the laughter, into the process to believe it. And here I am. I bought the shit, and now look at this. I got membership losing their benefits. I got people losing their jobs. We got, development projects going south on us. We've got tariffs that are now killing us. Oof. I can't wait to see the guys that grow soy and grow other products that have a margin that allows 5 or 6% wiggle room to wake up tomorrow and find out there's a 25% tariff from China now.
Yep. Well, I thought it was really funny how quickly, like when he first got in, he was every weekend, if he wasn't going to Mar-a-Lago, he was going to some rally. Even that stopped. Nobody wants to see him.
No.
It must be driving him nuts. So, yeah, I expect the momentum to increase almost on a daily level. I just hope it doesn't go overboard, but I guess that's why you have to watch.
Yeah. Then there's the embarrassment factor. I mean, I think part of the base sticks to them because to walk away, you just got to admit you were an asshole out of the box. And it's not you were an asshole because you voted for Trump as opposed to Clinton, because I clearly understand why people hate Clinton. But you were an asshole because you bought the bullshit. All right, turn around and vote for Trump over Clinton because you hate Clinton's guts. All right, fine. Right in Stein, I don't give a shit. But the numbers of people that bought that swallowed the Kool-Aid, and they just swallowed it so deeply and for so long that now they feel almost obligated to continue sucking it down, lest they end up looking like fools. There was some, and it was sort of a come to Jesus moment. There was a TV crew that was out doing a visit, and they were interviewing former Trump voters.
Oh, yeah.
And, one of them finally broke down and just said, it was talk about a come to Jesus moment, and just said, what an asshole I was. I mean, I just can't believe that I got hustled. This is the most embarrassing moment of my life. This was like a 75-year-old guy.
Well, that's why he admitted it. He's that old. If he was 55, he probably wouldn't.
Unbelievable. Well, my friend, I think we've gone past the show.
Yeah, we're recording overtime. It'll be in the archive. I may have to go back and edit some of that silence. We'll see if BTR cleans it up. They usually do, but I thank you very much for your insight, sir.
Well, I wish I could be, more insightful. I have spent
there's the benchmarks. There's nothing to go off.
Yeah, well, I've spent 30 years, giving advice, drawing conclusions on the basis of various factors, including in, the international arena. And you can take a look. The players, the issues, and to a reasonable degree of certainty, you can say, I think X or Y. And I find myself that just not able to do it at this point. I have my opinions. I have my hopes. I have my expectations. I have the unique advantage of having, seen this guy from up close for, 40-plus years in New York City. But the hope is the orange jumpsuits are coming close to the family.
Yes, I will be supporting that conclusion as well. I hope we have a vote where we can choose the ending. Call now. Oh, well.
Well, my friends, I want to thank you again for inviting me. It was a great show, and I think I'm about to crash. I'm going to work tomorrow on this piece, and hopefully your audience enjoyed tonight. I enjoyed, as always, doing the show. And for all those folks out there, my parting message is not just up the rebel, but despite the uncertainty, besides the question marks, despite the nature of the nightmare that we find ourselves surrounded by, resistance is a marathon. It ain't a sprint. So keep on fighting, keep on battling, keep on pushing back, keep your voices loud and clear and certain and focused, and we'll be all right.
I could not agree more. Always a pleasure. Stanley Cohen, thank you very much for this episode.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care, Glenn.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.